One of the most asked questions of all time is, does God exist? Since the beginning of history, man has always tried to answer that question. They've used religion, sorcery, astrology, and other things to do so. In that process, many civilizations have created some interesting religions and practices to satisfy those curiosities. Because, generally speaking, human beings understand that with a God, you can set up things like morals and justice. You can determine whether or not there's an afterlife, but you need a God first. And because man has always tried to do this, they have come up with some things like, for example, animists believe that not only people, but objects have feelings. Aztecs and similar groups like that believed in sacrificing and shedding their blood of their own people, even children, to the deities who controlled nature, like the rain god. In modern day, Scientologists believe that with the assistance of some kind of machine, you can access the deep recesses of your mind to look back in your own history. They say even your own past lives. The purpose for that is to eliminate certain negative things that have caused you to become who you are today. And by eliminating those bad things from your past, you become a much better person today. And once you've gone through that process, you become what they call a thetan. Now, remember, a thetan is low level. And once you become a thetan, you essentially are subjugated to this hierarchy within the Scientologist religion. There is some information that the top level has that they say is too dangerous for even their own low level followers to have. That information is about this guy named Xenu. He was from outer space, he was some kind of dictator, and they say that 75 million years ago, that creature, Xenu, came to this planet and brought the first Thetans. I think they even believe that some of them are still amongst us today. So that's what they believe. And it's very curious that the Pentagon uses the same excuses, the same tactics on the American people. When the public asks about flying objects in space that no one can identify, they claim that they won't share that information because it's too dangerous for the public to know about. Anyway, it's just interesting that the Scientologists and the Pentagon uses the same excuses, and perhaps someday we'll do a video on that. But for now, the point is, generally speaking, man always comes up with weird things in their search for God. And if you pay attention closely enough, you will see that as we move away from the past and not knowing things, as we move into the future with science, technology, and even globalism, that question about whether God exists will disappear into irrelevance. It's not going to matter whether God is real or not. The real question will be, why do we need God? And if you don't believe that, listen to these following examples and see if you can spot a pattern. Most of the world, even so-called believers, have already conceded to the teachings of evolution. You don't need to pray for one another. You can just go to the doctors and get medicine when you're sick, or get a procedure when necessary. Farmers don't need to cross their fingers as much as they used to before, because scientists can now mass produce their own artificial corn for the world. Right and wrong is subjective, left to your own feelings or the status of your society. What's the pattern here? God is not needed. You don't need God for creation, or for your daily life, or for your food, or for your morals. When the entire planet does things like this over and over again, something very scary happens. The human race develops a consensus about who the real God is and whether he is simply available but not necessary. The reason why this is scary is because it is going to be the most influential and powerful people who will control who this God will be. That whatever God that they accept is only a symbol. They'll even say that you can be your own God. Now let's look at this on an individual basis. Look at your neighbors, even look at yourself. You'll spot something. People create their own God while claiming to believe in the real one. They create a God that is based out of sentiment, of their own heart, of their own mind. A God that is convenient for their lifestyle, emotions, conscience, and yes, even politics. You will see angry activists walk through the streets of the city accusing God of hating certain groups of people, and they do so without using any accurate Bible verses. Nowadays, men leave their wife and their children for another woman and then claim that it's God's path for them. A woman would go to church with a big smile on her face and then give a homeless man dirty looks on the way home. All of these people believe in a God that is convenient for them, and perhaps they are looking for the real God. Perhaps they've convinced themselves that they know Him and that they have a relationship with Him. But if you take a step back, you will see that it is a God only convenient for their own life, which means that cannot be the absolute real God, and they don't know enough about the real God to make that distinction. Now let's look at this on a much larger scale. A friend of mine sent me a video. That video was of a group of religious leaders from all over the world who were meeting in the name of world peace. The most intriguing part about that meeting was that they were praying to one God, the Creator God. And shouldn't that be a good thing? World peace, praying to the Creator God? Sure. Until you recognize that in order for all of these religions to pray to one God, there would have to be a consensus that there is only one God, that their God of their beliefs must be set aside for a second to pray to this real God. But the real God that they are praying to would be a God that has not any set truth. It would have to compromise somewhere in order to fit all of these religions in harmony. What kind of God would do that? What kind of God would sacrifice truth on the altar of compromise for the sake of world peace? That cannot be the one true absolute God. The one true absolute God would stand firm to the truth no matter what. Who would believe in a God that would compromise truth? Would you? Perhaps people who don't know enough about Him would. Perhaps those who are not willing to look for the truth on their own would believe in a God like that. Now, if you don't mind, please allow me to humbly save you some time and point you in the right direction as to whether God is real. He is, and He is the one and only, and He is very, very necessary. Think about it for a second. Think about a world without the real God, and ask yourself, who would be in charge? You? Of course not. All of mankind would be. Now, what they won't tell you is that more specifically, the powerful man will be in charge. They'll be able to say what's right and wrong. They'll control the information you consume. They'll filter what you can and can't say. They'll convince everyone that their God is the one and only and that He is simply a symbol. Any other God you hear about is just a thing of the past. All gods of the past were merely created to explain the unknown. And since mankind knows everything now, there is no need for God. Now, the most scariest result of all of this is that they're going to say that an afterlife is unproven. It's not backed by science. They're going to say that an afterlife is only a fairy tale for the hopeless. Could you live in a world like that? 70 or so short years here on earth, filled with all of this pain and heartache, poverty and stingy rich people, oppressive governments, endless wars, meaningless entertainment, and a grave as your final destination? Could you? So, let me just encourage you by saying, we don't have to submit to that kind of pressure of the entire world. They want to hide and obscure who the real God is. And my best advice to you would be, look for Him yourself. You'll find Him. And if you need help doing that, stay tuned.